The Masters of the Universe franchise has always been famous as one of the most imaginative creations in pop culture history in terms of fantasy and sci-fi storytelling. From the vibrant toy aisles of the 1980s to the comics, the animated series, and of course the modern reboot of today, the franchise's take on high fantasy, cosmic technology, and colorful characters has captured the hearts of multiple generations. At its core, Man and Skeletor embody the timeless clash of good versus evil, and because they have always dominated the spotlight, these characters went on to become household names and pop culture icons whose presence often defines the series. Their battles are legendary, their imagery unforgettable, but even then, they are only the tip of the iceberg in a vast and diverse universe. I understand how easy it is to forget just how deep and richly populated this franchise really is. For every familiar face that has dominated posters, lunchboxes, and Saturday morning cartoons, there are dozens of other characters who have quietly shaped Eternia's stories. Some were even childhood favorites that we all remember vividly from toys and episodes, yet they never gained the same widespread recognition. Even if these characters may not always receive the same level of attention, they have been equally essential in shaping the battles, adding unexpected layers of power, and even stealing the show in its quieter moments. In fact, I think the backbone of a good franchise lies in its ability to prove that not every hero or villain needs the spotlight to leave a lasting impact. Although they may not always be front and center on the poster or the toy shelf, they still bring unique powers, fascinating backstories, and surprising depth that enriches the overall He-Man mythos. These characters remind us that Masters of the Universe is more than just a tale of one muscle-bound hero versus a skull-faced sorcerer, but it's in these overlooked corners of the franchise where much of its charm lies. With that in mind, let's turn our attention to 10 such underrated but undeniably powerful He-Man characters who also deserve their moment in the sun. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Count Marzo. While most evildoers in the Masters of the Universe franchise wear their sinister intentions on their sleeve, Count Marzo was actually a far more insidious and realistic villain. Appearing as a normal human, or as normal as a human can look in a He-Man series, Count Marzo preys on the vulnerabilities of children, getting the kids of Eternia hooked on an evil substance known as the Eternia Flower. To me, Count Marzo was honestly one of the most fascinating and complex villains in the Masters of the Universe franchise, standing apart from the usual rogues who clashed with He-Man. Unlike the brute strength of Skeletor or the scheming of other villains, Marzo uses sorcery, strategy, and personal ambition to launch his attacks, which makes him both dangerous and intriguing. Now, his backstory varies depending on the version of the franchise. Initially, in the 1980s cartoon, he was introduced as an ancient sorcerer who could transform children into slaves, which was a very dark and twisted scheme that immediately set him apart as compared to other unsettling He-Man enemies. Later, in the 2002 reboot series, his origins were further expanded, revealing him as a nobleman turned traitor who tried to seize control of Eternia. Betrayed and stripped of his title, he then turned to dark magic to fuel his vengeance, thus cementing his place as one of the franchise's more tragic and layered antagonists. Count Marzo's powers were mostly rooted in sorcery and his mysterious amulet of power, which granted him immense magical abilities. With it, he could manipulate energy, summon blasts of destructive force, and even conjure physical objects. His mastery of magic allowed him to stand toe-to-toe with some of the most powerful beings in Eternia, making him more than just a one-off villain. Unlike Skeletor, who is fully driven by world domination, Marzo's motivations often felt more personal, which gave his schemes a different kind of weight. Maybe that's why he was also one of the rare characters to receive an action figure through the Masters of the Universe Classics toy line after an excruciatingly long waiting period. Faker. Honestly, Faker is one of the most distinctively strange characters in the Masters of the Universe, as he literally served as a dark reflection of He-Man. Introduced originally in the toy line and later adapted into various animated series, Faker has always represented the idea of deception, infiltration, and the danger of facing one's own likeness. But his backstory has shifted across various versions of the franchise. In the 1980s cartoon, he was little more than a magical duplicate created by Skeletor in an attempt to trick the heroes of Eternia. His early version was not really given much depth, but his chilling resemblance to He-Man left a mark on us fans. The 2002 reboot series gave him more nuance, reimagining him as a robotic duplicate engineered by Skeletor to mimic He-Man's strength and combat skills. This further added a sci-fi edge to the character, further tying him closer to the technological side of Eternia's lore. In comics and expanded stories, Faker has sometimes been portrayed as an imperfect clone, as he is often seen struggling with his identity and his loyalty towards his creator, thus making him more tragic than simply villainous. I mean, it was Skeletor's magic that created Faker from nothing, so he naturally followed Skeletor's commands and pretended he was the real He-Man. As a near-exact copy of He-Man, Faker also claimed to have powers equal to He-Man's, and when they clashed, he did prove that his strength was a correct match. He even used similar moves and fighting techniques like the real He-Man. Moreover, from a distance, Faker could act well enough to fool even He-Man's close friends. In fact, his robotic or magical enhancements often make him even more resilient than the real hero. While he can't always replicate He-Man's heart or bravery, his ability to sow confusion and force the heroes into tough situations made him an effective weapon for Skeletor. I mean, just existence was alarming enough, because if someone like He-Man could be cloned, then nowhere in Eternia feels truly safe. Apparently, Faker's original toy was famously made by simply repainting the He-Man figure in blue skin with orange hair, while making him wear Skeletor's armor, and it was this odd design choice that was so loved. Shagora. You knew things were bad when the heroic warriors and the evil warriors had to team up. That was the case when Skeletor brought the demon Shagora to Eternia to help him conquer the planet. Unfortunately, Shagora decided to take over all by himself, so he captured Skeletor and all of his soldiers before imprisoning the sorceress and transforming her into a harpy. Eventually, after restoring the sorceress, Evelyn and Skeletor pooled their powers with the sorceresses to banish Shagora from Eternia for good. But when this monstrous tentacled entity attacked Castle Grayskull, he was able to easily pull down the drawbridge and enter, which is an impossible feat for most villains. Even Skeletor was in awe of the creature's power, particularly when it turned our beloved sorceress into a cackling nightmare. I think Shagora is still one of the more obscure yet unforgettable villains in the Masters of the Universe franchise. Introduced in the original He-Man and the Masters of the Universe cartoon during the 1980s, Shagora only appeared once, but that was more than enough to cement his place as one of Eternia's most dangerous threats. In his backstory, Shagora is a monstrous creature from another dimension, summoned to Eternia by the misguided wizard Negator. Instead of serving his summoner, Shagora quickly turned on him, revealing his true nature as a chaotic force that thrives on destruction. But Shagora was less of a scheming villain like Skeletor and more of a force of raw, uncontrollable evil. His arrival only focused on the dangers of tampering with forbidden magic and gave us a rare glimpse of a cosmic horror invading Eternia. Shagora's powers were vast and frightening. His multiple tentacles allowed him to overpower entire groups of enemies with ease, while his sheer size dwarfed most heroes and villains. Even if he's barely spoken about, Shagora is often remembered by fans for his Lovecraftian design, which was a departure from the more toyetic, humanoid villains of the series. Sadly, this guy never received a toy figure of his own. Ram Man. In the OG 80s cartoons, one of He-Man's most colorful compatriots, Ram Man, once fought alongside the heroes of Eternia, making use of his incredibly strong head and his unusually springy legs, with which he could fire himself as a projectile weapon against the enemy like a human battering ram. Though not the sharpest tool in the shed, Ram Man was always a loyal and dependable ally of He-Man. It always made the younger kids in the audience giggle when he made a boing noise on bouncing into action. Meanwhile, the older kids and parents were more likely to smirk at his inadvertently rude-sounding name. First introduced in the original toy line and 1980s cartoon, he stood out immediately for his squat, stocky design and his unique power set, which made him unlike any of the other heroic warriors who fought alongside He-Man. In terms of his backstory, Ram Man was sometimes depicted as a bit slow-witted or gullible, but his unwavering bravery and loyalty always shone through. In the 2002 reboot, his character was given more depth by presenting him as a reclusive warrior who eventually joined He-Man's forces after learning to trust others. This update gave him a layered personality, thus making him more than just comic relief and highlighting his courage as a key asset to the heroes of Eternia. Ram Man's powers revolve around his extraordinary durability and his unique ability to launch himself headfirst into enemies or obstacles. His spring-loaded legs allowed him to perform powerful headbutt charges that helped him knock down walls, battering through enemy defenses, and even sending opponents flying. His incredible resilience made him an unstoppable force in battle, acting as both a battering ram and a shield for his allies. While not as flashy as a sorcerer or as mighty as He-Man, his role as a frontline warrior was indispensable. Cobra Khan. Perhaps the most cunning and intelligent of the Snake Men was Cobra Khan, a villain of incredible physical strength who paired it successfully with deception and manipulation. In the 1980s Filmation series, Khan was successful in luring He-Man to his underground realm in order to frame him for a crime so that he could court favor with his people. And in the 2002 series, he was instrumental in releasing King Hiss from his imprisonment in the Void. Khan's greatest asset was his ability to read a room and those within it. It's this skill that makes him one of the most intelligent villains of the franchise, and he definitely uses it to play sides against one another while building up his own credibility. First introduced as an action figure in the mid-1980s, and later appearing in the original cartoon, Cobra Khan quickly became known for his treacherous nature and unique powers, which made him stand out among Eternia's rogues. In the 1980s cartoon, this slippery villain was primarily seen as a loyal minion of Skeletor, using his reptilian abilities to help in various schemes. However, the 2002 reboot gave him stronger ties to the Snake Men, thus expanding his lore by making him one of King Hiss's trusted soldiers. This further emphasized on how his allegiance to Skeletor was more of a temporary convenience, and that his true loyalty always lay with his serpent kin. This dual identity made him particularly dangerous, as no one could fully trust where his loyalties lay. Cobra Khan's signature power was his ability to spray a cloud of sleep-inducing mist from his mouth. This toxic breath could immediately incapacitate enemies, giving him an edge in both direct combat and ambush tactics. Combined with his reptilian agility, sharp reflexes, and cunning mind, he was just as imposing, despite not always being as physically strong as other villains. His deceptive personality often allowed him to outmaneuver allies and enemies alike, making him one of the more sly and unpredictable members of Skeletor's forces. Man-E-Faces. Man-E-Faces is one of the most creative characters in the Masters of the Universe world, and he was definitely not your typical warrior. As his name suggests, he can literally change faces by switching between a human, a monster, and a robot. His backstory is actually pretty touching. In the original cartoon, he was an actor who found himself cursed with these shifting identities. At one point, Skeletor tried to use his monstrous side to control him, turning him into a weapon of evil. But due to He-Man's guidance, he eventually learned to master his transformations and ultimately embraced his place among the heroic warriors. That inner struggle of learning to balance the different sides of himself makes him more layered than many of Eternia's fighters. In battle, Man-E-Faces was incredibly versatile. His human side reflected his normal self, resourceful and brave. The robot face boosted his mechanical strength and perception, giving him an edge in strategy and tech-based fights. Then there was the aggressive monster face, which allowed him to overwhelm enemies through sheer force. This ability to shift roles depending on the situation is what made him such a revered character. Apparently, his original action figure had a rotating head feature, and the kids could twist it to reveal his different faces, which made him one of the most memorable toys of the line. Over time, fans have come to see Man-E-Faces not just as a cool gimmick, but as a character with real depth. After all, his story was never just about changing forms, but about truly accepting every side of yourself, even the parts that feel hard to control. Evil Seed. Evil Seed is one of the few nature-themed villains in the Masters of the Universe franchise, known for his strange, plant-like appearance and his ability to manipulate the natural world for his own dark purposes. Introduced in the early 1980s as part of the expanded toy line and later appearing in comics, Evil Seed brought a different kind of threat to Eternia. With him, it was less about brute strength and more about cunning, corruption, and the manipulation of life itself. In fact, he was a demon of nature who was born from the darkest parts of the earth and flora. Evil Seed's goal was to spread chaos by corrupting the natural world by turning plants and creatures against the forces of good. Unlike villains like Skeletor's world-dominating ambitions, Evil Seed represented the idea of nature as a wild, uncontrollable force that could be twisted into evil. In some interpretations, he was imprisoned by Eternia's heroes long ago, only to return when the land's balance was threatened. This origin gives him an almost elemental quality, thus making him feel ancient, relentless, and inexorably tied to the very fabric of Eternia itself. Evil Seed's powers were mostly centered around plant manipulation and life control. He could animate vines, roots, and other vegetation to ensnare his enemies, create barriers, or even attack directly. Some versions also give him the ability to summon monstrous plant creatures to do his bidding, thus making him an inherent threat even to the most powerful warriors. His magic also allowed him to blend in with forests or overgrow entire areas, meaning he could turn nature itself into a weapon. Evil Seed's original action figure apparently featured a shockingly detailed plant-like design, including all the tendrils and vines to emphasize on his menacing essence. Sadly, not many people can remember him anymore, probably because he only appeared in a handful of episodes or comics. Despite his creepy aesthetic and refreshingly unique theme for a cartoon villain, ardent fans often cite him as one of the most underrated villains in the franchise. Moss Man. Instantly recognizable for his green, moss-covered body and mysterious nature-inspired abilities, Moss Man was first introduced in the 1980s toy line and was later brought to life in the cartoon series. Apparently, Moss Man's original action figure actually had real moss on his body, thus giving kids a tactile connection to his powers and making him one of the most distinctive toys in the line. This guy stands out not just for his appearance, but also for his connection to the natural world, thus embodying the idea that even the environment itself can fight for good. Moss Man was a guardian of the forests and protector of Eternia's natural balance. In the classic 80s cartoon, Moss Man often appears in lush, forested areas, emerging from trees and foliage to help He-Man and the other heroes when any evil tries to threaten the land. Though sometimes portrayed as a quiet character, his loyalty and courage are undeniable. He definitely represents the mystical side of Eternia, given that his powers are deeply intertwined with the forces of nature. Moss Man can seamlessly camouflage into his surroundings, thus effectively becoming invisible within forests and jungles, which allows him to ambush enemies or move unseen. He can also control plant life to entangle enemies, create barriers, or form protective shelters. His abilities are mostly magical, as his strength comes from his deep connection to the earth itself. Tri-Klops. Tri-Klops is one of the most cunning villains in the Masters of the Universe franchise, who is instantly recognizable by his mechanical, rotating visor that houses 3 deadly eyes. Introduced in the original 1980s toy line and cartoon, Tri-Klops has always been revered for his intelligence, technical skill, and unique visual design, which sets him apart from the more stronger villains in Skeletor's army. In the original cartoon, Tri-Klops was introduced as a loyal servant of Skeletor, who was often tasked with reconnaissance, espionage, and crafting elaborate traps to take down He-Man and his allies. But the 2002 series one-upped his character and showed him as a brilliant inventor and strategist, whose skills in technology and alchemy made him one of Skeletor's most valuable lieutenants. While his loyalty was usually unwavering, he was also depicted as ambitious and sometimes got super frustrated by being overshadowed by more prominent villains. Tri-Klops' powers stemmed primarily from his rotating, multifunctional eye visor. Each of his eyes has a different capability, as one can see great distances, another can see through objects, and the third can emit energy blasts. These abilities make him an exceptional scout and marksman, who is capable of observing enemies from afar or striking with precision when needed. Even Tri-Klops' original action figure was known for its rotating visor mechanism, allowing kids to spin his eyes and mimic his scanning and targeting ability. Whiplash. In my opinion, Whiplash was one of the most memorable and visually striking villains in the Masters of the Universe franchise, who was instantly recognized for his long, powerful reptilian tail, which he wielded as a weapon. Introduced in the 1980s toy line and later appearing in the cartoon, Whiplash combined his brute strength with his super sharp intellect in order to rain absolute hell upon He-Man and the other heroic warriors of Eternia. In general, Whiplash was portrayed as a cunning and loyal member of Skeletor's evil warriors. In the original cartoon, he was often used for heavy-duty attacks and ambushes, relying on his tail to attack multiple people at once. Eventually, the 2002 series added more depth to his character and presented him as a fierce, independent warrior who sometimes chafes under Skeletor's leadership. Coming to his powers, Whiplash was just incredibly famous for his strong whip-like tail. He could swing it with immense force to break walls or immobilize enemies. His tail also gave him excellent reach in battle, thus allowing him to attack from a distance while staying out of harm's way. Beyond his physical prowess, Whiplash was surprisingly agile for a character of his size, as he was able to twist, turn, and strike in ways that often caught his enemies off guard. His dexterity and strength was not a combination that was very easily found amongst He-Man villains. Even Whiplash's original action figure featured a long, flexible tail that kids could bend and pose in order to perfectly imitate his signature weapon. Despite not being as widely known as Skeletor or Beastman, Whiplash had become quite a fan favorite among collectors back in the day. So that brings us to the very end of this video. The He-Man universe is just so vast that it's rather easy to forget a few faces who have barely made a couple of appearances throughout the franchise. But that does not mean these fleeting faces have not left behind an impact on us when we first saw them on TV as children, right? Now, tell me which underrated He-Man character has always retained a space in your memory even after all these years. Let us know in the comment box below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
You forget, He-Man. I have your...